Welcome to the Right Take Podcast, news, ideas, and conversations at the intersection of politics and culture, a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. I will be your host, Mark Tapson. Welcome back to the Right Take Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Tapson. Thanks so much for joining me here at the intersection of politics and culture. Well, it's a brand new day in America. A week ago, Donald Trump and the Republican Party scored a stunning, massive election victory over the forces of evil. Things are looking pretty rosy for conservatives right now. But of course, the real work of reversing the damage done by the far left agenda and making America great again has not yet begun. And although they suffered a resounding defeat, the left is not giving up or going away. As my friend and colleague journalist Michael Walsh is fond of pointing out, the left never rests, they never sleep, they never stop. Trump and his team will be facing relentless resistance both outside and inside the D.C. halls of power every step of the way. The left isn't about to back down in their obsessive aim to destroy America as we know and love her. They are religiously committed in this war, and so the fight goes on. The War to End America is actually the subtitle of a brand new book that I just finished and highly recommend. And as fate would have it, the author of that book will be joining me momentarily, and we're going to make a deep dive into his alarming analysis of our most dangerous enemy, and that is the enemy within. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss this conversation. And let me say, as always, please take a moment to subscribe to The Right Take if you haven't already, so that you can keep up with the important conversations we're having here with thinkers, writers, pundits, scholars, and storytellers. And if you like what you hear, a positive review would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, and don't touch that dial. My guest today at The Right Take is an economist, successful businessman, investigative journalist, best-selling author, he wears a lot of hats, and a former economist and budget examiner for the White House Office of Management and Budget. He's best known for his expose on the Cloward-Piven strategy of manufactured crisis, and that happens to be the title of his brand new book, Manufactured Crisis, The War to End America. James Simpson, welcome to the Right Take Podcast.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you could make the time because I want to talk about this new book. I just can't express enough how comprehensive this book is in terms of laying out the strategy of the left and addressing all the different aspects of their agenda. I mean, you've got chapters on DEI, on the border crisis, on voter fraud, the January 6th insurrection or the so-called insurrection, environmental hysteria, and maybe just everything. And maybe most importantly, a chapter about what's to be done, which I want to get to in a bit. And at the same time, each chapter is a really informative deep dive. So I think it's not just a quick or shallow survey of the left's agenda to end America. It's incredibly informative and well done. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, in a sense, this book is kind of a culmination for you of literally decades worth of work in your investigation into the left's agenda, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I began really serious research on the left when I was teaching at the University of Delaware in 1985. And as an economist, I was just dumbstruck. You know, I still had a lot to learn, and I wasn't particularly up on history at that point. And I was just dumbstruck at how so many people were so captivated by the Marxist idea, the communist idea, the idea of socialism, because, you know, any first year econ student worth his salt could recognize it for the foolish idiocy that it is. But yet it has become the greatest competitor to our free market capitalist system, which uniquely in the world stands out as the most successful form of, you know, governmental organization and economic organization that's ever been created. And so why were so many people fascinated with this idea of communism. So I really went into a deep dive to try to figure out why. And it took me about a year, and then I had a realization that these were just the most monstrous individuals that have ever risen out of the muck, and their goal is to destroy everything good in the world so that they can rule with impunity, period. And the people who follow it, most of the people who jump into it have really no idea what the actual agenda is. All they know is the feel good part that says, oh, we'll be able to save the poor and we'll be able to do this and that. And it's all nonsense.
Is that the does that explain their this resurgence, I guess, because there's kind of a resurgence among young people of interest in socialism again. It's this attitude that, oh, we never did it right before. It was never true socialism. It was never true communism. This time we'll get it right. Is it this idealism, this kind of utopian worldview of the left? Is that what enables them to overlook the actual real world damage that it does?
Well, yeah, and the funny part is that that's really not new. Back in the 80s, when I would talk to people about it, they were saying the same thing. Oh, well, they just did it wrong. They weren't very smart about it. If I were in charge, I would do a much better job than that. And of course, this is nothing more than the perennial, multi-generational attribute of young people since the dawn of time, and that is they are possessed of an arrogance that exceeds their ignorance and lack of experience. But it's that enthusiasm, that drives things forward, that drives them forward, that makes young people the best fighters and things like that. But at the same time, that arrogance is dangerous. And as our nation has drifted further and further away from a godly, God-fearing nation, that arrogance has gone out of control. We used to have a little bit more humility about things, I think, and children had more respect for their elders, and their elders, frankly, were worthy of more respect than they are these days. So, it's that entire cultural downhill slide, um, that was very well articulated in Robert Bork's book, Slouching Toward Gomorrah. That this is the consequence of it. You have kids with no idea what the reality is, and they have been fed this nonsense by Marxist college professors. And those people are also very diabolical and very clever because they knowingly capitalize on the, you know, arrogant optimism of young people to flatter them into thinking that, well, this generation has it right. All the other generations before, they just didn't know what they were doing. And, my own daughter said that to me. I said, honey, it's been tried 100 times. And she said, yeah, but what if we could do it different? Shouldn't we try? You know?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head a moment ago when you said that that religious faith gives us a humility to recognize that we're flawed human beings and we're never going to be able to manufacture or socially engineer heaven on earth. And that's what sets one of the big things that I think sets conservatives apart from the left is we have that recognition and they don't. They're driven by this utopian worldview. But
And
the
it's a
biggest,
secular, it's an atheistic worldview.
yes, and
and
Marx
and,
was,
and they Yes, and it comes right from Marx, who he was not an atheist. Marx was not an atheist. I don't know if you saw my prior book titled "Who Was Karl Marx," but was an Amazon bestseller. In it, you know, I I just exposed the fact that Marx was not an atheist. Marx believed in God, but he wanted to be equal to God, and he said so.
I think this Marx capitalized on this human impulse to, well, it's the oldest temptation in humanity, right? You shall be as gods. You start the book with a chapter about the seeds of this crisis that we are facing. I think it's important for people to know, well, it's definitely important for people to know the historical origins of the left's agenda. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, uh, when you learn about Marx and all of his colleagues, followers, compatriots, etc., Frederick Engels, his partner in crime for as long as he lived, they all talked about uh, obliterating everything existing. And when they said that, what they really meant was everything existing in the West, because that was what they really knew. That was where they all grew up, and they were the, best armchair critics in the world. Um, and so their goal, destroy it all. Um, and for example, in the 1800s, when Europe was, or when Britain was industrializing, they did have a lot of problems. And he incorrectly associated that with capitalism. Uh, Instead, it was actually a British government policy, to take people out of the country and jam them into the cities to provide cheap labor for the growing industries in the cities. So it was government policy. It wasn't a free market situation, but that's what he saw. He said, "Oh, capitalism was awful and it's creating all of this poverty." No, it was government policy, and it was temporary. So his solution was a permanent solution to a temporary problem that had been misdiagnosed to begin with. And but they were so uh, in love with themselves, in love with their opinions, that they thought, well, we know the right answers, and all of these people are creating horror. So our job is to destroy the West and replace it with our wonderful new vision. And he was actually pretty vague about what that vision was. But one of his followers, which very few people talk about or even know of, you guys are probably some of the few exceptions. Sergei Nechayev was a Russian anarchist, and at 22 years of age, when of course he knew everything. Like, what's that? What's that? That bumper sticker? Hire a teenager while he still knows it all. Um, he, he wrote the Revolutionary Catechism, and in it he says, "Our task is terrible, total, universal, and merciless destruction." And he said, all we want is the happiness of the masses, that is, the people of manual labor. They supposedly had this great affinity for the middle class, the manual laborers, uh, when in fact most of these people were wealthy, spoiled brat children of rich industrialists. Uh, but he said, all we want is the happiness of the masses, convinced that their emancipation and the achievement of this happiness can only come about as a result of an all destroying popular revolt. The society being the revolutionaries, will use all its resources and energy toward increasing and intensifying the evils and miseries of the people until at last their patience is exhausted and they're driven to a general uprising. Well, that's kind of what happened in 2024 election, isn't it? We got so fed up, but fortunately, we weren't driven to civil war, which is what the left, the radical left, has been trying to do. Has been, this has been what we've been through. For most people who don't realize, we all know we've been driven nuts by all these insane uh, agendas that the left dumps on us. What we don't realize is that none of those matter to the left in their own, um, having to do with the individual agendas. The left doesn't care about transgender agendas. It doesn't care about uh, illegal alien rights or anything like that. It is literally a communist provocation strategy to just literally jam a stick in our eyes over and over and over and over again, using every lever they can consider until we're so fed up that we'll start, that will literally uh, start a civil war, which they can then utilize as a pretext to clamp down on us. And I really think that that's what this is about. This is what Sergei Nechayev in the Revolutionary Catechism advocated, and that Revolutionary Catechism became the template for all communist revolutions that followed afterwards, starting with the Bolshevik Revolution, or really coup attempt, successful coup in Russia.
Yeah, what's that saying? The issue is never the issue is always the revolution.
Well, yes, David Horowitz said that, and he was quoting another 60s radical, and I used to know the guy's name, but he's long since passed. But yeah, but David was quoting him, and that's exactly the case. Um, and I repeat that in this book as well as my previous Marx book. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. So it doesn't matter what issue you're talking about. All of those issues are only of interest to the left if they can be used as a lever to advantage them in one way or another, or advantage their agenda. And, for example, I talk about in The Seeds of Crisis, I talk about the Frankfurt School, the School for Social Research, founded in 1923 in Frankfurt, Germany. And in 1933, they were all fled because the Frankfurt School was a communist school founded with communist international monies at the direction of Lenin. And the idea was to create this school. They called it the School for Social Research to give it sort of a bland name. But in fact, it was a communist school. All of the professors were communists. Many of them were Comintern agents. Some of them were Soviet agents who were using that college as a cover for their spy and other subversive activities in Germany. And and the goal was to indoctrinate children to become communists. And in 1933, when Hitler took power, they all had to flee because Hitler was rounding up the communists. Although at the same time, the communists, Lenin's communists, or rather Stalin's communists at that point, and um, and the Nazis were actually working together, and the Stalinists were telling uh, the Nazis who among the communists they could round up. So, but on the face of it, they all had to flee, and most of them were actually Jewish communists as well, so they had two strikes against them. And they were resettled at Columbia Teachers College by Edward R. Murrow, who as a young man ran the International Institute for Education and later became, news anchor, famous news anchor at CBS. And so he was a radical, at least from the beginning. Anyway, so those communists um, began teaching um, those who would later become teachers and administrators in many of the colleges, high schools, secondary schools, universities throughout the country. And uh, they came up with what they called critical theory. And critical theory was designed to criticize every aspect of Western society. And that was just the beginning that got the ball rolling. Now, today, there's critical race theory, which came right out of critical theory and was advocated, if not created, by um, one of President Obama's favorite college professors. What's his name? Bell, I forget.
Oh, Derek Bell.
Derek Bell. Yeah, thank you. And there's critical legal theory. There's critical pedagogy. There's hundreds of critical theories today, and the idea was to criticize every aspect of our society and break it down into ever smaller portions so that nothing would avoid this harsh criticism by the left. And so today we see that um, evidenced in the way the media operates and the people that they quote. They are all, you know, criticizing every aspect of our society. And that is what they are teaching our children in secondary school and at universities. It's absolutely inexcusable. And the worst one, really, to me, is the whole transgender issue, because now it's not only telling children to attack their parents and to attack their society at large, it's basically telling children to attack themselves and destroy themselves. And what can be more divisive? What could be more uh, horrifying to parents than watching a school uh, take their child away and convince that child to physically uh, maim themselves in ways from which they can never recover. It's horrific. Those people should be in jail.
All those critical theory ideas that you mentioned and the Frankfurt School, that all kind of falls under the umbrella of cultural Marxism, doesn't it? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, yes, that cultural Marxism is the umbrella term for all of the stuff that they're doing. And it's very funny because they realized early on, Willy Munzenberg, for example, I quote Willy Munzenberg, who was a German communist, very resourceful and very smart German communist who was the person behind much of the Soviet organizing that occurred in the 1920s and 1930s, including the Frankfurt School. And he said, we must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink, because only then, when we have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose the dictatorship of the proletariat. And so, but the important thing to realize here is he said, organizing the intellectuals. They had long since abandoned Marx's idea of turning the workers, the manual laborers, into revolutionaries. The manual laborers were doing just fine, thank you very much, and they had no interest in losing their chains, as Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. Uh, Marxism uh, had proven already that all it did was put people in chains, but they weren't going to get the working class, the middle class, your average Joe to join in their communist revolution. They had no interest. So who did they turn to? They turned to the revolutionaries, I mean, to the intellectuals. And why did they turn to the intellectuals? And it's so funny because in this uh, chapter, uh, Munzenberg realized, Munzenberg knew, and that all you needed to do to get the intellectuals on your side is flatter them. You didn't have to pay them a penny. All you had to do was flatter them. And why you think about that? You think about all of these, you know, self-righteous, arrogant college professors who think they know it all, and all you got to do is flatter them. And that was something that a number of leftists understood very well. One French polemicist called it the treason of the intellectuals. And Ruth Fischer, who was a friend of Munzenberg's and a leader of the German Communist Party, said, Willie knew that you don't have to buy the intellectuals, you just have to flatter them. And so, just because Marx was totally wrong about everything, especially the idea that they were going to get the working class to revolt, um, as in true form, they weren't really interested in the fact that Marx was wrong. They just had to find a different way to make it work. So they came up with cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism didn't exist until 100 years after Marx, when these people said, "Hey, Marxism isn't working the way we thought it would, so we're going to have to come up with something else," which points to another reality of the entire communist agenda. It has nothing to do with imposing this sort of flaky, ethereal, utopian idea called communism. It has to do with those people getting power. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, you're right. I think they discovered or realized gradually that economic Marxism was not exactly successful in the real world. However, cultural Marxism did turn out to be extraordinarily successful, didn't it? I mean, at least in terms of Marxist ideas infiltrating literally every aspect of society.
Yeah. And, as they recognized, even um, Vladimir Lenin, who was the first leader of the Soviet Union, recognized the truth of Marxism wasn't that it was this utopian vision for the future, but rather it was a system of strategies for gaining power. And now you could say that perhaps if you want to give them credit for having some kind of um, admirable motive, for lack of a better word, uh, maybe they believed in concept that, gee, communism's a good idea, and wouldn't we be doing the world a favor if we got rid of capitalism and imposed communism? So, the poor were better off, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps in theory, they could have claimed to believe that as their justification for all the radicalism that they engaged in and all the dirty tricks they played and everything they did, including mass murder. But once they got into power, within days or weeks or months at the most, uh, they realized, if they didn't already know, what an economic disaster Marxism was. Uh, and so, um, really, the truth of communism is that it is a system of strategies for very, very evil people to seize power and the wealth that goes with it uh, at everybody else's expense. And the secret police that uh, come right with it are an essential component of that system, because once people figured out how thoroughly they've been screwed, uh, they're going to want to have the heads of these people. So these people in advance create secret police systems that are able to surveil everybody in that nation right down to the neighborhood and even family level.
Yeah, the leftist agenda is really totalitarian at its core, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And it's the only way it works, and it only works for them. And the ones that are in charge, the ones that are running it, the George Soroses of the world, the Obamas of the world, the Hillary Clintons of the world, um, they know it. They know it. It's the 90% that follow it mindlessly, that have been captured by its rhetoric. Uh, they're the ones who actually do all the work, um, and they literally have no idea what they are doing.
You have a chapter about what you call the fountain of evil, and the word evil has come up a time or two in this conversation already. I'm glad you're willing to use language like that to call the Marxist worldview evil, because that's really the most truthful way, I think, to describe its consequences. You've already mentioned the transgender movement. What are a couple of other ways in which you can see Marxist evil manifesting itself in American society today?
Well, I mean, practically, I don't know of any leftist agenda. I don't know if any agenda on the Democratic side, if there's any platform that is anything but evil. They are all bad. I mean, maybe you could just say their economic policies are idiotic and destructive. Um, I say call them as evil because the people at the top who will benefit from these things, those people are literally evil, and they recognize that all of their agendas, every single one, is designed to destroy our country so that they can have uh, absolute power with no remaining impediments. The United States became what Lenin called the main enemy as soon as the Soviets took power in 1917. They recognized even then that the United States was the most powerful um, Western democracy, and just our very existence was a threat to their um, future, because we could be the most pacifistic nation in the world, and we would still be the biggest threat, and the one that they would have to vanquish, simply because of the alternative example that we set. For no other reason. But the chapter in the book, Political Ponerology, The Fountain of Evil, this really gets down to the meat of the subject. Ponerology is the study of evil, and the person who came up with it um, was a guy named Andrew Labazenski. He was a Polish psychologist who lived in Poland during the communist period. And he collaborated secretly with a small group of Polish, Hungarian, and Czechoslovakian scientists who studied the communist leaders in trying to understand the totalitarianism that um, they were practicing. And the secret police watched them all the time, and one of them was killed. Um, he wrote a book called Political Ponerology, and he had to throw it in the fire just minutes before the secret police raided his residence. And then he gave the second edition to an American tourist who was going to take it to the Vatican, but he never did any such thing. And then finally, he was allowed to leave, and he came to the United States in 1977. But he, when he moved here, the Polish Communist Network in New York made sure he couldn't get a job anywhere, and they prevented him from getting um, his book published. And he finished it again in 1984, but nobody would take it. Even he approached Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was President Carter's national security advisor, and the father of Morning Joe co-host Mika Brzezinski, by the way. And Brzezinski just blew him off. And so he didn't publish it until 2006, which was a year before his death. But he said that, all of these radical ideologies, doesn't matter, fascism, communism, anarchism, any of them, they are, as I put it in the book, the window dressing that attracts and allows ambitious psychopaths to insinuate themselves into positions of power and wealth. And that's the true goal of totalitarians everywhere: power and wealth, but they never have to earn it, they just steal it. And these people are literal psychopaths. And he um, diagnosed them as such. And this book is a powerful book. Um, and it's really amazing the work he did and the conditions under which he was able to do that work. But it's really quite, it's an incredibly good book.
Very interesting. Well, your book came out just prior to the election, a week or so ago, and fortunately for America, the left fared pretty badly on all counts: the presidency, the Senate, and the House. We're in kind of a honeymoon period right now when things are looking kind of rosy for conservatives, but the real work has yet to begin. Does the Trump victory change anything about what you have written in your book? Are you optimistic that we could turn this ocean liner around and steer America back toward greatness again?
Well, it doesn't change anything about the book's conclusions. Um, those people are every bit as evil as I say they are. All of the agendas that I discuss are and have been in operation for 100 years or so. Um, and the important thing is that these are the agendas that need to be destroyed. They need to be reversed. The people who are promoting them need to be exposed and removed from positions of power where legally possible, and put in jail where legally possible, frankly, because most of them are really anti-American subversives. The left is not the loyal opposition. The left is the American branch of the Communist International that is literally has as its singular goal to destroy our nation and to take over and rule the entire world under communism. And that was the purpose of the creation of the UN, the United Nations most people don't know, I'm sure you probably do, that most people don't know that the UN Charter was written by Alger Hiss, one of the most notorious Soviet agents in American history. He wrote the uh, uh, documents that founded the United Nations, along with 16 other communists and Council of Foreign Relation people who were communists and who had earlier written, the document for the League of Nations. And so the the United Nations is simply a foreign policy arm of the Soviet Union. That's how they always saw it. And they actually gave Alger Hiss an award for all the work he did on their behalf. It's simply amazing that he got away with all this stuff in broad daylight, and nobody stopped him. But that's how you have to look at this. We are fighting an international movement that is intent on destroying our country. And unlike our nation, where we have a 4-year planning horizon because of the nature of our, presidential elections, they have a 100-year planning horizon, and we have to make our country, including its uh, Republican institutions, constitutional. We are a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy, and thank God. And um, we have to make, we have to, put our uh, institutional arrangements inside a titanium bath of armor, basically, and make it bulletproof for successive administrations, um, in order to be able to successfully counter, if not defeat, the international communist movement. And so the value of this book is in understanding where these various agendas came from, who uh, who created them, and what their intentions are, and then knowing that, what we have to do to defeat them. And one of the biggest chapters is my last chapter, titled "What is to be done," which of course takes from Lenin's book of the same topic, "What is to be done." They wanted to know what was to be done to destroy us. Well, we want to know what is to be done to destroy them. So I have uh, this very long chapter goes into discussing what we can do uh, to to fix our country. And the election of President Trump is a necessary first step that gave us a four-year breathing room to start to figure out what we can do. And I mean, President Trump is very effective. He was very effective in 2016. And so we are likely to see a lot of very positive changes very quickly. In fact, we already are seeing a lot of changes, and he hasn't even, um, become president yet. You know, oil prices are falling. Uh, uh, the Russians want to talk to us. Uh, the Hamas wants to negotiate a peace. Everything's changing very quickly because they all know that he's a man who means business. So this is all really positive developments, and so that will help to bring our country back on track. But 4 years from now, we could have the best economy, uh, every single poor person taken out of poverty, and the world in harmony and bliss, and the left would still be following their same agenda. And they would still be determined, they would still be saying, oh, they're a bunch of racist Nazis. they would still be saying all the same garbage that they're saying now because they have that agenda, period. That's all they see.
That is exactly right. We can't afford to be complacent about a Trump victory. I think people really would like to know what kind of steps they can take in their daily lives to take America back. What are a couple of things, or maybe the most important thing, whatever you'd like to address, that the so-called average person could do in his or her daily life to make a difference?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, there's no magic pill. There's no one thing people can do. There are a lot of things that have to happen. Um, and a lot of it, frankly, will take people out of their comfort zones. We need to, but minimally, uh, people need to start re-engaging with the political class, and they need to hear from us what we want. We did that with the election, and that was great. But I believe the election was still had a lot of vote fraud. I think that um, Harris didn't get as many votes legitimately as she was able to get, and I think the uh, our victories in the Senate and the House were limited by vote fraud that has occurred in a number of states, particularly I think of Arizona, where Kerry Lake lost, at least at present, even though they haven't finished counting, has lost by about a few percentage points, um, whereas Trump won the state of Arizona by I think 8 points or so. Um, it's these are kind of things that are hard to square. Uh, of course, we had Mitch McConnell, who gave her zero money, while he gave somebody like former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, he gave him $50 million, and Larry Hogan was really not likely to win a Senate election, even though he was elected as governor here twice. And he's really he was an anti-Trumper, a rhino, and so so she didn't have help from the GOP as she should have, and that's one area where we need to change things. People don't realize how much power they have in their hand with a pen and a piece of paper and writing to their elected representative. Of course, the Democrats won't listen to us. It's worth uh, talking to them anyway, just to tell them, no, we don't like your positions, and this is what we want. But especially Republican representatives and senators need to hear from us so that they know they can be more confident in the things to support in the future. And there's so many, and the biggest thing, this is where people can be much more influential, is in state and local elections. We tend to just vote, during the presidential election or, every year, every 2 years for members of Congress. Um, but we ignore uh, judges, uh, city councils, county councils, county executive, um, state legislatures. We tend to ignore those or give them much less emphasis. And that's where the left flourishes and continues to flourish. I don't know what happened in county elections anywhere else, but around here, they they were as bad as ever. And most people don't know where their judges stand, uh, what their judges' backgrounds are. Uh, are they members of the National Lawyers Guild? you know, Communist Front? Just simple things like that to learn about the people who are in influential government positions in local uh, in local governments, because really it's sort of ground up, and the extent to which we can um, change that is going to that's where we will see a lot of results in our given areas. Right here where I live, there's this plan to um, build a mixed use, low income housing project smack dab in the middle of this very nice suburban area. It will massively increase traffic because there's just not the infrastructure for it. But you absolutely know that the county executive got paid off to promote it, because everybody, Republican and Democrat, that live in this area were against it, and everybody let him know too, and he didn't care. And guess what? Now he's been elected to be a member of the U.S. Congress, and utter corruption, just and crazy plans they have, plans to replace the main thoroughfare with a light rail, with a local rail service, which will just make things a bigger mess, and all in our tax dollars. So those are the kinds of things we need to look into. We need to uh, convince our state legislatures to pass uh, voter integrity laws, especially uh, positive voter ID, and making sure that no illegals are allowed to vote. But, in-person voting, uh, paper ballots with voter ID would take away most of the vote fraud uh, that the Democrats have engaged in, especially in these last few election cycles with the use of mass mail-in ballots.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that too many conservatives forget about the power that they have to make a difference in local elections, especially if you look at the numbers of conservatives who don't vote in every election. It's actually very shocking. Um, Jim, apart from buying a copy of Manufactured Crisis, which I highly recommend, where can people go to keep up with what you're doing?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I have a web page, and it's crisisnow.net, www.crisisnow.net, and that contains links to my latest book, Manufactured Crisis, my previous book, Who Was Karl Marx, which was a bestseller. Glenn Beck said that that book should be in every household in America, um, and other books that I've written, and my archive of articles going back to 2005. Uh, and I post, when I write a new article, I usually provide a link to it at that site. Um, and that's also, if you go to that site, that's the easiest way. You will see pictures of the Manufactured Crisis book and the Karl Marx book, and you can just click on those images, and it takes you right to the Amazon page where you can order the actual books.
Excellent. Good to know. James Simpson, thanks so much for coming to The Right Take. Great conversation.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. Great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Listeners, pick up a copy of Manufactured Crisis, The War to End America by James Simpson. You will find it riveting, deeply informative reading, and it will also light a fire under you to fight back against the relentless left's agenda. And thank you, as always, for joining me here at the intersection of politics and culture. Don't forget to subscribe to The Right Take so that you can keep up with all the important conversations we're having here. And if you like what you hear, please leave that positive review. Be seeing you. The Right Take with Mark Tapson is a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Front Page Magazine. Unauthorized reproduction of this podcast without express written consent is prohibited.